Welcome to Truth by Billie Beene. Today's date, February 4, 2026. Time in Texas, about 7 a.m. Some of the things we'll cover. 84 million U.S. bank accounts to be frozen. And President Trump blames the recent U.S. freeze in Texas and Florida on China. And Iran tries to seize a U.S. tanker. And don't breathe the air in Florida and Georgia. What's going on there? Gold and silver, where will it go? And a recent peace plan written by globally famous Martin Armstrong. Some of the sources I'll use today: God in the Bible, Patriot, Subscriber, Real Raw News, Daily Caller, Daily Mail, Martin Armstrong, Hal Turner, and EARTHMASTER Plus. So let's get started. So we have to expect, according to NOAA, a low-level geomagnetic storm G1, February 5 and 6, tomorrow and the next day. That was caused by a CME released recently by an X8 flare that came off of sunspot 4366. We do continue to see increased earthquake swarms in the Cascadia and in California near San Francisco Bay, San Ramon area. And we've had two small earthquakes, magnitude 2, very deep, 11 to 12 miles in the past 24 hours in the San Francisco Bay area. We've had something like recently 4,000 earthquakes in the Cascadia area in the past month or so. So we're continuing to see swarms in the Cascadia and in California, primarily affecting in California the Hayward Fault. We have this from STEFAN Burns, a geophysicist. Yeah, he continues with this increased flare activity we're seeing off the sun. We know we had 23 M class, it's now up to 5X flares from that same sunspot that happened about 2 to 3 days ago. So STEFAN Burns is continuing to give a 10% chance for a Carrington. Now, I've learned that the Carrington, as I put out, was about an X45 flare intensity. But that included multiple flares coming off the sun. So in my previous video, when I was explaining how to add X flares and M flares together, that's how the Carrington worked in the 1850s. It took down telegraph wires. Well, we know today if we have another Carrington event, satellites, internet, cell phone, and so on would be out. Electronic technology. So I agree with Stefan. We hope we don't get anything like a Carrington. And he says it's increasingly probable, as I agree, and Ben Davidson with YouTube Space Weather, formerly Suspicious Observers, and other geophysicists. I'm not a geophysicist, but I was a Earth Science major in college. I used to teach high school science, so I do know a little bit about it. So we hope we don't get a Carrington, but a higher probability exists as we see a increasingly weakened electromagnetic shield over the Earth. And we have from EARTHMASTER, last night we had another 1.5x flare. That's the 5th X we've had in the past few days. And we're continuing to see a swarm of small earthquakes near San Francisco, San Moran area. And another source I'm using, Cosmos Whisper. He does puts forth some good information. I do disagree with him. He believes the electromagnetic shield around the Earth is down about 10%. It was down 10% like 10 years ago. I tend to agree with Ben Davidson and other sources that it's likely down 30% officially. And my thinking is it possibility that it could be down as much as 50%, because we know the U.S. government doesn't tell us anything until they can no longer hide it. And he puts forth this. Yes, he's talking about the Earth's magnetic pole. Now we have geographic locations for the North Pole and South Pole. We also have a magnetic pole. That's what shows up on our compasses. And he puts forth, yes, it has been moving from Canada. The predictions are it will move from Canada over to Siberia. And it is rapidly moving at 50 kilometers per year, which is not seen, I agree with this, in modern records. And the trajectory, most experts in this field agree it's going to move from Canada to Siberia. And we know right now, going on for the past 2 to 3 years, that GPS has to frequently be updated, and that runways on plane tarmacs have to be repainted because of the change in the magnetic poles. So that's going on. Now he puts forth information about this is being caused, this magnetic movement speed that we know is up, and its movement is caused from the dynamo inside the Earth bringing molten magma up to the surface. I agree with that. I had that word from the Lord in the fall of 2020, that magma was rising inside the Earth in all directions. And he also puts forth that inside the Earth's dynamo, the magma is moving. I agree with that. North Pole will move to Siberia. That's what the experts believe. And he puts forth the compasses and the North Pole now are considered unreliable because of this intense and fast movement of the North Magnetic Pole. So yeah, that's going on. And we have this. He also puts forth information about the South Atlantic anomaly, which I agree with. The South Atlantic anomaly is a dip in the Earth's electromagnetic shield down around South America. It started in South America. Here would be the U.S. And I have been putting forth for the past year, and this source, Cosmic Whisper, also puts forth that the South Atlantic anomaly is splitting. I put forth that it had split months ago and had spread over Europe. And we know, we had information from Stan Deyo, a physicist, that it had spread and is affecting the Canary Islands that are between the U.S. and Africa. I believe now it's covering much of South America. It's moving up to the Atlantic Ocean, possibly to move across the U.S., and is splitting and covering Europe. So that's going on. And he puts forth also that the weakening of Earth's electromagnetic shield certainly is letting in more cosmic rays. And another source, Best and Taylor, put forth like 6 months ago or so, that even we have UVA, B, and C. If you check the internet, it will say C rays never reach the Earth, but I don't believe that. Best and Taylor doesn't believe that either. And that C rays, which gives humans an increased exposure to radiation, have been reaching the ground due to the weakening of Earth's electromagnetic shield. So yeah, that's going on. And we have this, from Real Raw News. Yes, we recently saw in Florida, big freeze, iguana lizards falling out of trees, experiencing what's called stun cold. They just fall out, then they revive as the temperature warms up. We also saw all the way down to the south coast of Texas below freezing temperatures. President Trump recently assembled a weather warfare committee, headed up by the U.S. Government Office of Science and Technology, Director Michael Kratzlos. And this information is coming out that the U.S. government believes that the recent U.S. freezes we've been seeing over the U.S. have been caused by HAARP, operated from China from the Henan province. And now a plan for the U.S. is to reactivate the HAARP in Alaska, which had been turned off, but to reactivate the HAARP in Alaska to form a shield over the U.S. Way to go, President Trump. Weather Warfare Committee. And we have this. Tens of thousands of people in Florida and Georgia are being warned by the EPA to stay indoors. This is affecting Daytona Beach and Atlanta, Georgia, because we have heavy metal particles in the air to the concentration of 12.5 times the safe level. And this ingestion of these heavy metal particles can certainly cause lung problems, but it can also contribute to heart attacks. Now, this article from the Daily Mail is putting forth the cause for these heavy metal particles in the air. Possibly could be wildfires. So that's going on. So Daytona Beach and Atlanta, Georgia, be careful. You actually might want to wear some type of mask if you're outside. We have this. What's up with shipping? So we had a few months ago, that was near the UK, we had a ship, the So Long, with a Russian captain who ran into an anchored vessel that was contracted to the U.S. military and was carrying U.S. jet fuel. The Stena Immaculate just ran into it. So a trial has been held in the UK, and they also had on the Solong, operated by the Russian captain, a Philippine sailor whose body has not been recovered. He passed away. So the Russian captain was found guilty of manslaughter. So that's going on. But I recall that ship accident, and my thinking was, what's up with this? We have a Russian captain managing a type of ship that hits an anchored ship carrying U.S. military jet fuel. So that's going on. We have this from Stephen Gardner regarding ICE. So we know, and I've put forth, that the protesters against ICE, especially in Minnesota, are paid $1,000 to $2,000 per day, and we're finding out it's more money than we thought. They do the protest, then they get on buses, they're taken to hotels. It's believed we have foreign parties such as China and George Soros, a deep state operative. Also a CCP individual, Neville Singham, paying the bills. Now, we're seeing headlines, but no details, that the FBI is tracking the money sources. We know in Minnesota, and it's put forth, the reason we're seeing so much going on in Minnesota is that the Minnesota government, the governor, mayors, and so on, are being investigated by the U.S. government, DOJ, FBI+, for the billions of dollars of fraud that's occurred in Minnesota. We have this, Ilhan Omar, Minnesota, Somali. She does serve in the House and Congress. Went from being virtually having no money in about 5 years, being worth $44 billion. She's being investigated. Kristi Noem, Director, I believe, of Homeland Security, puts forth that the Dems are operating a shadow government paid for by money to NGOs via certain avenues from the U.S. government, and also that some of these NGOs are propped up by money from the cartels in Mexico. So that's going on. And we have this. The FBI is investigating Signal Chat. We know that conspiracy that came out recently, that the protesters in Minnesota were operating on an organized Signal Chat area, and where several members of the Minnesota government showed up, like the Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan. Yeah, that's going on. And we have this. President Trump on Truth Social put out an emergency alert to U.S. mayors. The message is, you should stop protesters from burning federal buildings and killing federal agents. If you don't, we'll come after you with the U.S. military. Now, this is an example of insurrection in California by the Long Beach mayor, Rogelio Martinez, who made a public video for gang members from Mexico, Vietnam, Chinese, 55 gang leaders. He put forth a day and time for them to meet him in Long Beach, for them to get organized by him, the mayor of Long Beach, to attack and take down ICE agents. This is a clear example of insurrection. So I guess like Ding Dong, I saw him on the video and I'm thinking, are you completely out of your mind? We also have a San Diego, California mayor who's saying the top agitators are paid and they make $80,000 to $120,000 per year. And that a name that continues to pop up with regard to paying the agitators is George Soros, which represents, according to the mayor of San Diego, anarchy, insurrection. I absolutely agree. So that's going on. And we have this from Breitbart. So in the past few days, President Trump has struck a deal with India. India will stop buying oil from Russia. That had been part of the shadow fleet oil coming out of Russia. We know the U.S. has sanctions against Russia, which means any nation doing business with Russia will also be sanctioned. So India has agreed to stop buying Russian oil, and as a reminder, when the Soviet Union fell about 1989, it fell because the U.S. had successfully been able to manipulate a crash of its economy. So we see President Trump, rather than using kinetic war action, is trying to bring Russia down using economic measures. So India won't buy Russian oil, and they will also have some of their tariffs reduced. And we have this, also President Trump versus China, and I believe China is our #1 enemy. In the Panama Canal, the government of Panama, at the support and urging of the U.S. government, has nullified 2 contracts with China to pass through the Panama Canal. Way to go, President Trump. And we have this. Now, a YouTube site, I believe it's Asian guy, he does seem to know some things about the U.S. economy. Talks about the possible freezing this coming Friday of 84 million bank accounts. Now, these accounts would have money in them above the FDIC covered amount of $250,000. So these bank accounts would have money in there above $250,000, but there's 84 million accounts. And he's putting forth this freezing could come, and we would say this freezing of bank accounts could be a sort of bail-in by the banks to hold money in the banks to foundate their liquidity. And last Friday, many banks in the U.S. had to settle their futures contracts, and that goes along with the 3 instances put out by U.S. Intel of the Fed having to pump into banks billions of dollars of cash overnight in 3 different instances that occurred in the past month. And we saw a large bank in Chicago, I reported on it, Metro, fail a few days ago. So the bottom line is, it's good to have some cash to last you for a few weeks, but it's always good to have cash on hand to maybe carry you through 2 weeks, not because the banks are going to fail. I have other sources that say the U.S. dollar is the strongest in the world and is anticipated to continue to be strong into the next year or into the future. And, but it is good to have cash, and we see that going on. Another measure of just an economic swing. Now, I have information from Martin Armstrong, globally famous economist, and he has offices all over the world. So, and I believe Martin is an individual who speaks truth. You don't want to hear it. Well, he's going to put forth what he believes. And recently, President Trump asked Martin Armstrong to write a peace plan. And I'll give you details on that. So Martin is talking about gold going up by the end of 2026 to $8,500 up to $10,000 per ounce. He's seeing also for silver. We know silver is going down. The banks are manipulating silver and gold, but he believes by the end of 2026 that gold will go up to $200 per ounce. And he gives details about the peace plan that he wrote for America, and that is regarding what he believes, and he uses also a predictive software program called Socrates. And he puts forth that Europe is broke, and we know it's led by the European Union, unelected officials. If I lived in Europe, I would be out in the streets protesting these unelected European leaders trying to lead all European nations into a war against Russia, which Europe cannot win. It would result in tens of millions of European sons and daughters being slaughtered by Russia. It would result in the absolute crushing of the European economy. I say to the people of Europe, begin by praying against this, but I'll also make your voices heard. So Martin Armstrong's peace plan to President Trump regarding an upcoming Europe-Russia war was for the U.S. to stay out of it, which President Trump absolutely agrees with. So yes, way to go, President Trump. And we have this. President Trump has also stopped U.S. Small Business Administration from making business loans to foreign nationals to open businesses in the U.S. We see another example of the commie-dem plot to destroy America from within. So President Trump puts forth new regulations. U.S. businesses have to be owned 100% by American citizens. And we have this from BREITBART. Okay, so another plot by the CCP, China, to take America down from within. They would hire American women to act as surrogates to carry in their womb, Chinese children, then they would be born and be American citizens. President Trump is now taking action to get rid of this U.S. concept of birthright. And as I've put forth previously, doesn't line up with the U.S. Constitution. So way to go, President Trump. And we have this. Yeah, so Iran. Iran says, no, we're not getting rid of our enriched uranium. And they continue to say, yeah, okay, so maybe it's close to weapons grade. Right. But we're not getting rid of any of it. We're not going to negotiate peace with the U.S. or anyone else. And we have this unusual item in Israel yesterday. Israel put all of its nation's ambulances on alert. That's going to stay in place for the next 5 months. And we have in Iran, it's speculated that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, will try to begin kinetic war before the next negotiating meeting. Now we hear different things. This is Tuesday, a meeting Wednesday, a meeting Friday, a meeting Monday. So it's unclear what's going on with regard to meetings. And we have this. So Iran says, if Iran is hit, Iran will hit Israel and Azerbaijan. We know Azerbaijan was one of the great nations to sign on to President Trump's recent peace plan. Also in Azerbaijan, so we have Iran. There we go. Iran. Azerbaijan is right on the border of Iran. We do have U.S. military assets there now, I believe planes. So Iran says, if we're hit, we'll hit Israel and Azerbaijan. And we have this, that after the 12-day war, Iran changed their military doctrine to go from defense to offense. And we have this. Judge Napolitano recently interviewed Jeffrey Sachs, talking about the U.S. Treasury. So we see another action by the U.S. to take down the economy in Iran. Rather than engaging in kinetic hot shooting war, the U.S. tries to use economic measures against nations. And the U.S. has had tariffs and sanctions against Iran. And Scott Bessent, the leader of the U.S. Treasury, says to take down Iran, take down the value of their currency. And that has been accomplished by the U.S. The U.S. Treasury is also working with our against Venezuela to bring about a similar end. From TOUSI TV, talking about Iran. So last night, Iran had 2 small earthquakes, 4.8, 4.5, which are indicators by military analysts that Iran is testing some part of its missile program. And we know on February 3, Russia received additional equipment from Iran, received additional equipment from Russia, including attack helicopters. Now, what Russia and China are doing to support Iran is they're bringing in equipment. China also has a spy ship So we have India. We have the USS Lincoln. And we have now a Chinese spy ship out here watching the Lincoln. But Russia and China are not going to engage in kinetic fighting against the U.S., but they are delivering equipment and support to Iran. And we understand from last night, explosions do continue in Iran. And we have this. Yes, yesterday and today, the U.S. Navy has shot down 2 Iranian drones. They were sending drones out to near the USS Lincoln carrier group. The U.S. Navy has shot them down. Now, we also have this. So, we have near Iran, we have the Strait of Hormuz. We also have in this area international water. A U.S. flagged tanker was sailing in international water when Iran, the IRGC, sent out heavily armed gunboats to seize the U.S. flagged oil tanker. And the U.S. Oil tanker is named the Sterna Imperative. Well, the heavily armed Iranian gunboats were stopped by a USS destroyer, McFall. Then the U.S. flagged tanker continued on through the Persian Gulf, escorted by the destroyer McFall and in the air by the U.S. Air Force. A CENTCOM spokesperson, Captain Tim Hawkins, said, "The U.S. military will not tolerate U.S. flagged ships being boarded and attempted seizing in international waters." So take that, Iran. So it's good to be in prayer for America, President Trump, the U.S. military, and world peace. I love you, and I'll see you soon.